I have told this story so many times in my head that it feels like a reflex now, like checking the front door twice before bed or staring at the stove to make sure the burners are off. I don't replay it because I enjoy scaring myself. I do it because some part of me believes that if I keep every detail sharp, if I remember the sequence exactly, I might recognize it sooner if anything like it ever happens again. It sounds paranoid, I know, but once your sense of safety gets peeled away layer by layer, you start doing strange little rituals just to feel like you are still in control of something. Last winter was when everything changed. I live in a loud city where sirens, traffic, and muffled arguments draw paper thin walls blend into a constant background hum. For years I blamed that noise for how restless I felt. I was sure I needed silence, distance from people, from phones, from screens, from the constant friction of lives pressed too close together. I walked around burned out and detached, drifting through days like I was watching my own life from the outside. So when a coworker mentioned their family's cabin in the mountains, rented cheap in the off-season, it felt less like a suggestion and more like a lifeline. Total isolation, David said. No neighbors, patchy cell service, one road in and out. At the time, that sounded perfect. The cabin was in Colorado, just past a small town I would only have noticed on a map. By the time I got three, gray snow lined the shoulders of the road, frozen and dirty from weeks of thawing and refreezing. The sky was that flat winter gray that makes distance look closer than it really is. When I turned off the main road, my tires crunched over a narrow lane, half covered in all ruts and frozen slush. The driveway was longer than I expected, winding deeper into the trees until the highway sound vanished entirely. Winding deeper into the trees until the highway sound vanished entirely. Pines closing tight on both sides, branches knotting above me like a tunnel and blocking what little light pushed through the clouds. The farther I drove, the quieter everything became, until the only sound left were the low hiss of wind through old needles and the occasional crack of something heavy shifting under snow. When the cabin finally appeared at the end of the drive, it looked older than it had in the photos. The wood siding had gone dark from years of weather. The stone chimney leaned just enough to look tired. One upstairs window was fogged from the inside, and the front porch sagged slightly in the middle. It didn't look abandoned or dangerous, just worn, like a place that had already outlasted a lot of winters and expected to handle a few more. Stepping inside felt like walking into someone else's paused life. Mismatched mugs on an open shelf, a short stack of outdated magazines, pair of old boots tucked neatly under a coat rack, nothing current, nothing personal, but enough hints of other people to make the space feel occupied by ghosts of normal days. The air smelled of cold wood, old smoke, and a faint dryness of dust. The first day passed easily. I unpacked my bags, set my laptop on the kitchen table, lit the iron stove and listened to it catch with slow crackling breaths. Listened to it catch with slow crackling breaths. In the afternoon, snow started drifting down, thickening until the trees blurred out into a white wall. For the first time in months, my shoulders actually dropped away from my ears. The silence wrapped itself around me, and for a while it really did feel like a blanket. That night I slept deeply. No car alarms, no heavy footsteps in the hallway, no pipes banging in some neighbor apartment, just the wind, the stove, and my own slow breathing. If anything strange happened while I slept, it stayed outside the edges of my dreams. On the second day, I slipped into a pattern. Coffee, a few hours of writing, staring out the window at the pale, endless trees, then writing again. I reheated leftovers on the stove and listened to the cabin's little noises, faint clicks as the metal cooled, tiny shifts in the walls as the heat moved through them. In the afternoon, I walked a short way into the trees, just far enough that the cabin disappeared behind me. When a gust of wind rolled through and made the pines groan with a low, almost irritated sound, I turned back. The first thing that really unsettled me didn't happen until the second night. It was still at the kitchen table, headphones off, laptop open but basically ignored. It was well after midnight, the stove had burned down to a soft glow, and the cabin had settled into its usual pattern of small creaks and sighs. I rubbed my eyes, thinking about closing the laptop and calling it a night, when something in the living room made a sound. It wasn't one of the random pops you get in old buildings. It was dull, soft thud, as if someone had just dropped down onto the couch and let their full weight sink into the cushions. Not loud, but heavy in a way that made it feel close, unmistakably physical. I froze, the tiny hairs on my arms stood up in a wave. For a few seconds, I just sat there, listening. The cabin seemed to hold its breath with me. No footsteps followed, no fabric shifted, no second sound at all. Eventually, I forced myself to stand up. My legs felt heavier than they should. I walked slowly toward the living room, feeding myself every rational thought I could find. Old couch, shifting wood frame, maybe a log into store rolled against the side. Normal things, boring things. But under that mental noise, something deeper in me was already shaking its head. The living room looked exactly as it had a few minutes before. The couch cushions were still slightly uneven where I would sat earlier, the thin blanket draped over the armrest, the low orange glow of the stove pulsing behind its glass. Shadows sat in the corners, dark but predictable. Nothing was out of place, nothing was obviously wrong. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just walked into a room someone had hurriedly backed out of. I did a slow loop through the cabin, checking the front and back doors, peeking into the bathroom, opening the bedroom closet where spare blankets and a folded cot were stored. Every lock was in place, every window latched. There was nowhere for anyone to be. Back in bed, I lay awake for a long time. Every creak made my muscles tense as if bracing for something that never quite arrived. At some point around 3, exhaustion finally dragged me into a thin, restless sleep. The next morning I tried to log it off. I told myself the cabin was just amplified in my head, that I was used to drowning in background noise, and now I was hearing too much. The day slid by pale and quiet. By late afternoon, I had almost managed to convince myself that the couch thud had been nothing. The confidence lasted until the third night. It was colder. Frost traced its way along the inside of the kitchen window. I threw an extra log in the stove, wrapped the couch blanket around myself, and lay in bed scrolling through my phone until the battery sank low. Outside, the forest was absolutely still. No wind, no shifting branches, just a flat landscape of white and dark. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is waking up with my heart pounding and my mind already alert, even though the room was pitch black. For a few seconds I just lay there, trying to understand what had pulled me up out of sleep. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound overhead, not right above me, but somewhere toward the center of the cabin, light and spaced out at first. A pause, another scrape, then another, small enough that if I hadn't been fully awake, I would have missed it. I told myself it was mice, or a squirrel trapped in the rafters. All buildings have things living in them, everybody knows that. I clung to that explanation until the pattern began to change. The sound started to move. Instead of staying in one spot, the scratching traveled along the ceiling, shifting from one side of the cabin to the other in slow, careful lines. It didn't have the skittery, frantic feel of something small and nervous. It sounded like weight being tested, like something dragging across wood, just slow enough to stay quiet if you weren't listening, but not trying very hard to hide if you were. At one point, it stopped directly above my room. I lay there holding my breath, staring at the ceiling I couldn't see. The scratching went completely silent. The quiet that followed didn't feel like relief, it felt like attention. Eventually, I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and slid out of bed, moving carefully into the hallway. The beam shook slightly as I tilted it up toward the ceiling, then toward the short ladder that led to the storage loft mentioned in the listing. There was a hatch at the top, plain wood, rusted latch. I would never open it. Suddenly, the idea that something had been moving around above me in a space I would never seen made the back of my neck feel raw and exposed. The cabin stayed completely still, no more scratching, no more shifting. It felt like the whole house was waiting to see what I would do. My hand hovered near the ladder, but I didn't climb. The image of standing halfway up, reaching for that latch with my back turned, made something in me look up. Instead, I stood there for an embarrassingly long time, shining the flashlight at the hatch as if the thin beam alone could hold whatever was on the other side in place. Eventually, I backed away and went back to bed. I didn't sleep much. The rest of the night passed in a strange, tense quiet. Whatever had been up there, it no longer felt like part of the building. It felt like company. The next morning, in the safety of daylight, my fear felt stupid enough that I decided to finally check the loft. I climbed the ladder with my heart beating too hard for such a small effort, eased the latch open and pushed the hatch up just an inch or two. Dust and dry wood smell split down, old and untouched. No sharp smell of animals, no fresh droppings. With the flashlight, I scanned the visible section, low ceiling, random boxes, a rolled up rug. Some old furniture crowded into piles. The dust looked even. No abused footprints, no dragged trails. It looked undisturbed. I closed the hatch and told myself that was the end of it. Strange noises, nothing more. I didn't fully believe myself, but I wanted to. That evening I walked deeper into the forest than before. The snow had a hard crust that cracked under my boots. My breath pulled briefly in the air and vanished. The cabin disappeared behind the trees faster than I lagged, swallowed by trunks and undergrowth. For a while it was almost calming. The forest was nearly soundless, padded by snow, no birds, no rushing water, just an occasional creak as some old tree adjusted under the cold. Then I felt it, not a sound at first, just a pressure between my shoulder blades. The sense of being observed that everyone talks about but can't prove. I slowed and turned in a loose circle, scanning between the trunks. Everything was still, but the stillness felt tight, like a held breath. I walked a bit farther. The feeling intensified. It didn't seem to come from any single direction. It felt like the forest itself had turned and was looking straight at me. The urge to turn around and head back hit hard. I did one more slow scan, and that's when I saw something, or convinced myself I did. Farther out, between two trees, a vertical shape that was just a shade too dark to be a trunk slid sideways and vanished behind a pine. No crunch of snow, no snap of branches, just that smooth, wrong movement. My brain tried to frame it as a trick of light. My body wasn't fooled. Every instinct I had screamed the same thing: go back now. I walked quickly, fighting the urge to run. Running felt like admitting I was being chased. The closer I got to the cabin, the more it felt like something kept pace with me just outside my peripheral vision, never stepping fully into view, never failing completely away. When the cabin finally came into sight, my shoulders were up around my ears and my jaw hurt from clutching. I didn't realize I would be half holding my breath until I stepped onto the porch and all the air rushed out of me in a shaky exhale. Inside, with the door locked, the forest felt farther away again, like someone had shut a door on a conversation I didn't want to hear. But underneath that relief was a quieter understanding. I wasn't alone out there. and whatever else lived in those woods knew I was here now. That night I left every light on. It didn't help. Around 1 in the morning, the sound started again, this time directly above me. In the loft I would inspected. No scratching now, just slow, deliberate footsteps. The kind you hear when someone is pacing thing. They crossed from one end of the cabin to the other, paused, crossed back halfway, paused again. I sat on the couch, barely breathing, staring up at the ceiling. Each creak of wood felt like it was pressing down on my ribs. The footsteps shifted toward the area above the living room, then angled toward the hall. Then they moved the space above the bedroom, the same area where the scratching had stopped before, the same area over the bed where I would felt the mattress deep in the dark. Whoever was up there wasn't trying to stay silent anymore. They wanted me to know I was beneath them. I wanted to leave. I wanted to grab my keys, throw open the door, and drive until the cabin was just a memory behind me. I actually stood up and walked toward the front door, heart pounding so hard that I could feel it in my throat. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, another sound came, this time from the other side of the door. A soft creak of wood very close, the kind of noise you hear when someone shifts their weight on a porch step. Not walking, not knocking, just standing there. If I opened the door, I would be face to face with whoever was outside. My hand dropped from the knob like it had been burned. The footsteps above resumed, slow and unhurried, tracing a path across the loft that now matched the layout of the hallway and bedroom beneath it. It was caught in the center of the cabin, something overhead and something outside, with walls that suddenly felt too thin and windows that felt more like staring eyes than glass. I don't know how long I stood there, trying to make as little noise as possible. The room seemed to narrow around me, the corners darker, the hall longer, the door smaller and farther away. When the footsteps above shifted again and headed back toward the space over the bedroom, over the bed, that was enough. I bolted for the kitchen instead of the door, climbed up onto the counter, and yanked open the small back window. Cold air slapped my face. I squeezed through the gap, scraping my knee on the frame, and dropped into the snow behind the cabin. It didn't look back, I just ran. The snow crunched loud under my boots as I sprinted around to the front where my car was parked. Every second I expected to hear the front door burst open or footsteps pounding after me. The surrounding trees felt like a wall about to close in. I reached the car with shaking hands, fumbled the key into the lock, threw myself inside and started the engine. When I swung the car around toward the driveway, the headlights sliced across the front of the cabin. For a brief second, the beam caught the loft window. Behind the glass, I thought I saw a tall, too still shape standing just out of full view. Not a clear outline, more like a smudge of darkness that shouldn't have been there. Then the angle changed, and the window went back to being nothing but a black rectangle. I didn't look again. I drove until the cabin, and the trees and the mountain road blurred into one long stretch of darkness behind me. I didn't go back the next day, or the day after, or ever. Later, when I calmed down enough to sound halfway rational, I emailed the owner. I described the sounds overhead, the footsteps, the sense of someone on the porch. I left out what I would seen in the window. That part still felt too raw to type. They replied with polite surprise. The loft was only for storage. No one else had keys. The house was old. It likes to talk in winter. The message was friendly, quick, and a little too practiced. It read like something they would send before. I tried to fold the whole thing up and file it away as a weird experience. I went back to my normal routines, the city noise, the office, the days that used to feel suffocating and now felt strangely reassuring. Then the sound started in my apartment. At first, it was nothing definite. A creak in the hallway when I was sure no one else was there. The cushion beside me on the couch feeling briefly heavier when I stood up, like someone else had been sitting there too. The sense of eyes in the dark corners of my bedroom when I turned the light off at night, even with the door locked and the windows shut. City buildings make noise all the time, I know that, but these sounds didn't feel random. They had the same slow, patient rhythm I would heard in the cabin, the same intention. About a month after I left Colorado, I woke up at 3 in the morning, the way you do when something external has pulled you up out of sleep in one clean motion. The room was dark except for the faint orange halo from the street lamp outside. For a few seconds nothing moved, then I felt it. The matters dipped slightly near my feet, not just a vague impression of shifting springs, an actual, careful settlings of weight, an inch or two, no more, but I knew that sensation. I would felt it once before in a bed hundreds of miles away, in a cabin I had sworn I would never see again. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I stared up at the ceiling, too afraid to look down toward the foot of the bed, too aware of the outline of my own body under the blankets. The air in the room felt thicker, like something else was sharing it. No footsteps followed, I didn't hear breathing. There was just that quiet pressure near my legs and the slow, creeping understanding that whatever had been testing my sleep in that cabin had found me again. Eventually the weight lifted, the matters rose back to normal. No floorboards creaked, no door clicked, nothing moved in the apartment. When I finally forced myself to sit up and switch on the lamp, everything looked exactly the same as it had when I went to sleep. But the way I understood the world had shifted. I stopped blaming the cabin. The problem wasn't the building, or the forest, or even the isolation. The problem was that I had gone there and stayed long enough for something that lives in quiet spaces and thin walls and overlooked corners to entice me. Something that doesn't care about distance or locks or leases. Something that had been perfectly at home walking above my head and standing on that porch in the middle of the night, waiting to see what I would do. Now, whenever my own place settles at night, whenever I hear a creak directly above where I am sitting or feel the faintest shift of weight near the edge of the bed, I remember that driveway, that loft window, that porch. I remind myself I didn't just escape that cabin. I left while something was still standing there listening. And if it was able to follow me once, there is no reason to believe it stopped.